morning, as host of Question Time, David Dimbleby has turned his attention to producing a series of hard-hitting political podcasts.
In his new instalment, The Fault Line, Bush, Blair and Iraq, the veteran broadcaster uses his impressive contacts list to investigate Britain's involvement with the 2003 Iraq War. And David Dimbleby joins us now, live from Sussex. Well, good morning to you. Great man. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
I know exactly what it's like. When you're on the BBC, you are entirely even-handed and neutral, and you don't express a political opinion. And when you are outside of the BBC, you can be extremely opinionated and express exactly what you feel about things within certain contexts. But do you feel that since you've been freed from your role as chair of Question Time, you do feel more liberated, still on that channel, to express an opinion?
Yes. Yes, is the brief answer. I mean, Question Time is a particularly difficult one because you have all different opinions and you have to be totally impartial. I mean, I'm perhaps just letting my views show a bit more than I used to.
Well, we've seen it happen with John Humphrey. We've seen it happen with Dame Jenny Murray. You know, it's almost, and Eddie Mair described the same experience when he left the PM programme and went over to work for LBC. It's a different broadcasting environment.
Yeah. It's like you've all been let out of the cage.
Yes. It's obviously a bit, it's a bit liberating. Yes, of course it is. You don't have to keep stum quite as much. But, so what? I mean, we're all human. Everybody knows your views. Yes, everybody knows your views.
Yeah. Do you still want to enter the fray for the chairmanship of the BBC? I know that you were concerned when Charles Moore was suggested as a candidate.
I was shocked when it looked as though Charles Moore was going to be anointed by the Prime Minister as chairman of the BBC. Knowing his views on the BBC, apart from other things, I thought you can't have somebody who so loathes the BBC or has such a tiny, tiny understanding of what it does as chair. It's a dangerous thing. And I know the government wants to bring the BBC to heel. All governments want to bring the BBC to heel, always have, which is good for the BBC because it means we're a thorn in the flesh of governments, and that's what we should be. And, I've been doing it, 60 years or so, and I've never known a government that kind of loved the BBC. Mrs. Thatcher wanted to bring it down. Harold Wilson hated the BBC. We've had our run-ins all the time. So I didn't think that the right person to have as chair of the BBC was somebody who really seemed to loathe everything about the BBC. There's a wonderful, you look at Private Eye, there's a wonderful diary of Charles Moore's views on the BBC this week. Just goes on and on and on with every innuendo, every little kind of attack on the BBC he can make, he makes. So he's a thorn in our flesh, but I don't think he was right for chair. And all I wanted to do was to open up the debate and say, look, this is a big appointment. BBC is an incredibly important institution in Britain, and you cannot have it run by somebody who's hostile to it.
David, we're going through quite extraordinary times, aren't we? You were at the BBC 60 years, but in all your time, have you ever seen the kind of joint effect of the pandemic and the US election in terms of its importance, perhaps, on the entire planet?
I agree. I mean, we were talking about the fault line and about Blair and Bush, and that was a pretty weird time when we went to war against Iraq with the country as a whole, millions of people against it, and somehow we got landed in it. And I think, if I can put it in a way, Piers, I think that there's a huge distrust now about politicians, and I think it has its origins in what happened during the Iraq War, that for the first time, really, on a major scale, the country turned out to have been deceived about the reasons for the war, the weapons of mass destruction that weren't there, masses of people, thronging the streets and complaining about it, the Prime Minister saying, no, we've got to go to war because there are weapons of mass destruction. They turn out not to be, and not only not to be, but also both Bush and Blair being told there weren't any, but ignoring it. Bush because he wanted to unseat Saddam, whatever happened, and Blair because he'd started down that road and he couldn't get off it. So I think back then is when we began to get this feeling that we just don't believe our politicians. And I think Boris Johnson has been landed with that from the start for, both reasons to do with his private behaviour and things. I think he's never really been totally trusted. People have admired him. They've obviously voted for him. But I think that this government has found itself from the start in great difficulties, and it hasn't really recovered. But having said that, I mean, you say this is the worst thing that's ever happened. I'm not sure the Trump election or non-re-election, as I suspect is going to happen. I don't think that's as big a factor. I think the pandemic is the most extraordinary factor. Like, you know, we're just told in effect, curl yourself up in a ball, don't go out.
Well,
don't
how do
speak
you
to
find, as a man who quite clearly, from this interview, has got all guns firing, how do you feel as somebody who is now officially described as vulnerable and should be kept away and let the young get on with their lives?
Oh, Piers, I tell you what, my children don't want me to catch the virus. They're the ones who say to me, don't go out, don't do this, don't do that, because they're worried. And, you know, I respect that. I mean, I don't myself feel I'd loathe to have it. I know people who've had it, young people who've had it and are really still ill. I know people who've died from it. And of course, I don't want to get the virus. But I think the idea that in some way the young, you know, should behave in a way to protect us is a kind of insidious. I mean, I can't bear the sight of those students locked up in their halls of residence, just gone to university for the first time, having scrimped and saved, and find themselves being fed disgusting food on trays because one person has, you know, caught the virus. I mean, I don't know. I just feel it's. I don't think my generation should kind of be sacrificed. You know, we should all die and then the problem goes away. Case, but I'm. How can I put this? I feel sort of grateful that people think we ought to survive. The old and the vulnerable ought to survive. I'm not sure how vulnerable I am. I'm quite healthy, but I'm sort of grateful for that. But I'm sad for young people. I'm sad for people locked in tower blocks with children, with maybe just one person looking after them. You know, I mean, it's desperate.
Yeah, it's changed a lot of things for the worse, no question. Have you seen any benefit out of all this? I mean, when we get through it, which one day we will, God, hopefully anyway. When we get through it,
for a vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, when we get through this, what do you think some of the positives might be of such an extraordinary kind of short, sharp shock to the world?
In one word, introspection, I think. I think what it means is that everybody has had to reassess whatever their condition, however poor, however difficult their circumstances. Everybody for this year has been looking at their lives and working out whether this is the life I want to lead, how I can change it. If this thing goes away, which, as you say, pray God it does, how shall I live my life after this? Because this is like life closed down for a year.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of introspection is probably what will come out of it. But of course, massive increase in inequality, in poverty, in absence of opportunities, all the things you and I, Piers, were brought up on. Well, I say you're much younger than me, but we were brought up on of optimism and hope. And, you know, you can do anything in this world. Clearly you can't.
I mean, do you have a bucket list, David? I mean, do you have something where you think, when this is over, this is what I'm definitely going to do before it's too late?
No, I've never had a bucket list. I've never had a bucket list. I think I always hate that idea. Well, I want to climb Mount Everest. I want to jump out of an aeroplane, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
No, I tell you what I will do. I'll go back to going more to art galleries and museums.
Yeah.
An art gallery in Eastbourne that I chair has just won Museum of the Year. And it's the most thrilling thing that's happened to me during lockdown. It was announced yesterday. And it's that's the kind of thing I really love. I mean, you'll see pictures behind me and things behind me. I just see them now. I didn't notice they were there.
Arsene Wenger.
I think so.
Arsene
Sorry,
Wenger
just
this
hang on one second, Piers. Just reflecting on that point. I think that's such an important point, because actually it isn't the big bucket list items, is it, that we've been introspective about. It's the very simple things that, as lockdown comes, makes us realise what we really appreciate. For you, it might be going to a museum. For others, it might be simply going to the hairdresser. or seeing your, you know, when you've been told that your households can no longer mix, it's just seeing your mum and dad, or, you know, seeing your children, or, you know, your adult children. Those things suddenly become utterly, utterly precious in a way perhaps we've often taken for granted.
And they become kind of magical moments, don't they? Because, well, going back to painting, I remember we had, you know, 6 months with no galleries open. The first time I went into a gallery and looked at a real picture, my eyes were on stalks, you know, color and life. And I thought that was just magical, wonderful. And I think this meeting people who you've not been able to meet, there's terrible pictures of grandparents behind glass, you know, and the grandchildren sort of tapping on the window. I mean, that's not life, is it? That's not life.
David, Arsene Wenger quit Arsenal finally after 22 years. Has written his book, which comes out this week, which I'm actually looking forward to reading. He was, for many years, fantastic, and then just stayed too long, in my opinion. But, interestingly, in the extracts, he said he can't really bear to go back to Arsenal at the moment, and he's not ready. And that made me think, have you watched Question Time since you left? Can you bear to watch it?
It's difficult, Piers, to watch. I have watched it a bit. I think they're doing well. I think they're incredibly difficult for them doing it under these circumstances. I have this idea, actually, they should turn it into Gogglebox, where the audience remain the same all the time and the panelists change. Like they have someone like you and Susanna, you know.
Well, I did wonder, because I know that towards the end of your tenure, and you quit on a massive high, I thought you were just magnificent in that chair, but you always had a very rowdy audience, especially since Brexit and that whole referendum debate. The audience got ever more raucous, and I know that you felt that it was getting a little out of hand. It's interesting now, isn't it, that there's no audience at all, and you're actually getting to listen to what the panellists all say, and there's no reaction. They can't go for applause lines, and I was guilty of that as anyone. You know, you'd hit your big line, you'd get your big cheer.
Not?
Yeah. But do you think? I mean, do you think at the end of it, the Question Time should be without an audience? Do you think it's better without one?
No. I think it certainly needs the audience because that's where the kind of energy of it comes from. I mean, we had it in the Iraq War, for instance. That was the first time I noticed the audiences ganging up on the panel. And then over Brexit, certainly, time after time after time, they had this feeling of ganging up. You know, I share your view, I think, Piers, that politicians ought to go before the mob, to put it crudely. In other words, if you're a politician, you actually owe a duty to us, the public, to go out there and fight your corner. And the big politicians, the big beasts, are always willing to do that. Increasingly, politicians won't go out there and fight. And one of the roles of Question Time is to have that audience that forces them to speak. But, you know, their advisors say, oh, don't go on Question Time. There's that insidious phrase, there's nothing in it for you. Yeah. As though politicians should only do things where
as you may be aware, we've been boycotted by the government for 168 days now, which I think is it's just a total dereliction of their duty to our viewers, who are the electorate.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, you are a fearsome fellow. But you...
Thank you, David. That's the nicest thing you've ever said about me.
Not you. That'd be all right, then they come back. But no, I do think I mean, I go back to the fault line, to Iraq, to this podcast. That's where the seeds of all this began. This being let down by politicians, and then the politicians felt and the expenses scandal, of course, and then the politicians felt that the public were kind of against them, and then they just go into their own, to use the word bubble, they go into their own little bubble and act as though we didn't exist. You know, we only exist in terms of surveys of our opinion and all that. We don't actually exist as real people who can be argued with, who can be fought with, and who are politicians. You know, look back to the Victorians who have a duty to go out there and state your case. That's what democracy is about. And they won't do it, and it's wrong.